Today we are going to go over a topic about steroids, SARMs, and peptides, but specifically my use, my history of use, the whys, the hows. And this is not an effort to justify. This is not an effort to encourage in any way this of use. This is an effort to encourage people to educate themselves on the reasons why they may consider it, why they may think that they need, or a physician said, hey, you might want to consider this. Like, that's where this is coming around, because with my years of use, and you could easily categorize my use as abuse, right? And so that's the idea. And I had to actually write this down because of my extensive use. Goes into 3 pages in years. And so I want to lay this out again this was my psyche. This is where I was at, and it didn't start with the military. My use of anabolic steroids was really initially was for baseball. That's my first time in use, and I'll go through that here. And just broad picture stroke though, over the years of my use and being around it and blood work and being around tons of athletes and operators and things, and seeing how, like, this is my landscape, and I'm not ashamed of it in any way. I'm not here to decide anyone's moral compass. My reason for justification was easy back in the day. I don't drink, I didn't use drugs, all those sort of things that, and I didn't categorize this as a sort of a self-degrading thing. Whether or not you believe that or think about that or not, I'm not here to convince anybody either. I'm here to say this is the truth. And in a world where people don't like to tell the truth, especially stuff like this, because there's some fear around it somehow that I don't understand. I don't have that connection of worry and fear about what people think of me. I don't, especially when it comes to the job that I had. I was paid to take human life, and that balanced with anabolic steroid use, peptide and SARM use, so I could do that job at a much higher level, in my opinion, in my thought process. It was an easy justification. It was real easy for me. So broad picture again, like I said, my experiences is I have tried such a vast spectrum of these things. The one I can say, list the ones I haven't tried. I haven't tried Anadrol, and that's from like really people I look up to. Like, you just want to kind of stay away from that unless you really are serious about becoming a world champion and you don't give a shit about your health. Right, so I was like, okay, I think there's other ways to go about doing that, okay? I've never tried insulin, I never will. I'm not interested in that sort of life at all anymore. I don't want to be a big person anymore. I topped out at 262 at one point, and that was at the height of my anabolic use, and I'll talk about that, okay? I've used, since about 2009, I've been on a regular dose of various peptides as prescribed by my physicians. And the blood work to back that, and the whys and the hows, and the use of the continued use is because, quite frankly, because of my abuse, my organs don't produce some of these hormones, specifically testosterone. I cannot have children. I have an absolute 0 sperm count. I have a lovely son that's grown up, and I'm blessed to have that, but I cannot have kids anymore. 100% correlated to this and my concussions. So my pituitary gland issues, okay? So, and those are all correlated, but that's mine. And this is all the discovery I found out after all of my abuse, okay? SARMs are something I've used. SARMs are special androgenic receptor modulators. It's like a precursor and input, same with peptides in its way. I know from the science standpoint, I'm not giving it due justice, but I'm not trying to, right? If you want to understand the pharmacology of peptides and SARMs, I understand organic chemistry extremely well. Learn it. That's how you know, okay? And so I'm not here to, again, be a proponent that you should use it, or even a proponent that you should investigate it. But if you are going to use it and you are going to investigate it, my strong suggestion is that you educate yourself, not just with bro science on websites and whoever. Like, there is a tremendous amount of experts out there that deal with this. Like, for example, and I'll get to it, is I kind of turned the page on understanding this because I found a physician, that worked with bodybuilders after their stage time to help to re-regulate back to a normal hormone balance. And that finally, after years of abuse, it was like, well, you kind of caught too late, but now we got to manage, okay? So let's back way up, okay? I'm 46 years old. The first time I ever used anabolic steroids was my sophomore year of college. I was at junior college in Indian Hills, Iowa. My freshman year I didn't use it. I was a very small kid, very small. Used it, didn't really, I can barely remember what I was using. I remember they were very much cow, pig, dog, you know, right? So like Winstrol or Effervid or all these other things that were coming from equipoise for horses, right? I was in Iowa. People got a hold of that stuff, and I just like, okay, people are using it, we used it. So I did my sophomore year with great success of size growth and performance enhancement. That's what I got, and it was first experience. And for someone that never tried, I didn't try alcohol until I was 36. I've never smoked a cigarette in my life to this day, never will. I abused pain medication for a number of years, and so I'm not an angel. I'm not saying that any of my decision making is correct. This is just what I did, right? And this is to lay out the truth finally for people who wonder, right? And I don't hide behind, I just don't hide. I just don't fucking care. I don't care. It's don't need to hide. One thing I didn't use, truthfully, I did not ever use anabolic steroids or any SARMs or any peptides during BUDS or SQT. I had a legitimate fear because like the first class we had, like we brought into our classroom and the first thing they're like, don't go to Mexico. You get caught, you're going to get kicked out. And I was like, I don't need to do that. I was already prepared, and I didn't. I did not use anabolic steroids at all of any sort during BUDS and during SQT. And I didn't even use anabolic steroids my first deployment at SEAL Team 5. My first deployment, we just babysat a bunch of idiots overseas, the Prime Minister of Iraq, the President of Iraq, and it was just the most ridiculous, stupid deployment ever, babysitting grown men that didn't want to build a government, right? So I had plenty of time on my hands, right? So I worked out all the time. The joke my first deployment is we said that SEAL stood for sleep, eat, and lift. And that's what we did. We didn't do shit on that deployment hardly. Babysat of guys, did a handful of direct action missions with the Polish Grom, and that was really bad. It was super benign, okay? My second deployment to Ramadi, Iraq, I was the first time I ever really got exposed to it. And how did I get it, right? I got it from our interpreter. Our interpreters were able to go out in town to pharmacies in Ramadi, Iraq and procure whatever the hell we wanted, food, get everything, and we're like, oh shoot, could you get this? And we're like, of course we can get this. And it was pennies on the dollar. Pennies on the dollar to get that stuff. And I just remember him driving the interpreter was an American citizen as well, right? He had a vehicle, he was able to drive it on the base. So his entire trunk was just full of, like, we'd send him out of town to buy food, gifts, and drugs, right? And essentially that's it. He popped the trunk, and we take what he want and pay him what he had, right? And that was my first experience where the internet wasn't super prolific at that point, but you could look stuff up and kind of bro science it, and we'd kind of share thoughts and try to do this. They're like, what are you doing? We're trying. And it was by no means a good way go about doing it. It wasn't, and that's the truth. But that's the honest how I got it, okay? At the back end of that second deployment, I was able to get, for the first time ever, growth hormone. And weirdly enough, there were physicians in San Diego at the time that you could call to say, hey, I want to get this. And there was like code words you could use, and it was in Craigslist. That's how I found it. And you'd use code words, and then they would call you back, and they would give you a meeting location in somewhere in San Diego, downtown, a restaurant, and I showed up not knowing, and they were AIDS patients. They were AIDS patients selling off their growth hormone, right? That's what they were doing. So I sat down at this cafe down by the airport and Old Town area, and I went up to this guy that looked like he was really, really old, but he was young, and he was dying from AIDS, and he was just trying to get some cash so he could live out the last months of his life, whatever he was going to do with it. And so I paid the man cash. I got a bunch of Eli Lilly growth hormone, looked up online how to do it, kept it in my refrigerator, and went about doing it. And quite frankly, in hindsight, it's like it probably did jack shit to me, didn't do anything, because now looking back, I was like, that wasn't enough dosing, it wasn't a long enough time, and I didn't know. So that was my first unsuccessful use of a growth hormone, a real growth hormone, okay? I did not, so after the end of my second deployment, I came here to Green Team. I did not use anything during Green Team because I still had that fear of drug testing, and got at the very end of Green Team, I had some of my stuff left over from Ramadi that I had, and then I started using it after Green Team, and That was like I said, like the leftovers from Monty. From 2007 to 2000, that was from 2007 to 2009. And I had absolutely no guidance at that point, none. And I was so fucking, that's like first time, like my sleep was awful. The deployments were amazing, just doing awesome stuff. But I came back and appetite was gone, just couldn't sleep. It felt terrible. And that is the second time there I started, I was like, hey man, I got to figure this stuff out. I had a good friend of mine that was a coach working with a bunch of fighters, like world-class fighters in South Florida. So I ended up going down to South Florida, talked to him. He connected me to the doctor that worked with his fighters. Got the first time in 2009 is where I got blood work. And I sat down with someone that had some experience in like looking at blood work, what was going wrong. And my blood panel was, my free testosterone was, in the range is like anything below 300 or 400 was considered low at the time, or 500. Mine came back as a 016. Like, you have the testosterone of a 12-year-old girl, right? I was like, holy crap, how could that be? And then I started understanding the stress, the abuse, the lack of sleep, and things like that they started coming to a head. So I came back to the Navy, I did a blood draw, and they were a little bit freaked out by it because it was so low, and because it came back as a 086. And they're like, whoa, we got to do something about this. But they didn't know what to do because they'd never seen someone that was like, at that point, right, I'm like 29 years old, something like that, 28, 29 years old. And they're like, how could you possibly be that low after this job? And I was like a big guy and stuff like that, right? So big mysteries, and the Navy couldn't answer me. So I did a whole bunch of blood work in the Navy. No one here would even give me the time of day. I walked into Portsmouth Naval Hospital at one point, and the physician walked in, grabbed my folder, and the first thing that came out of the doctor's mouth, he goes, son, we ain't peddling steroids here. I'm like, all right, doc, thanks. And I just walked out and left. That was my first experience with Navy doctors and their inability to understand what was going on. And that's still to this day, I don't ever never did, right? So, and we'll get to that here in a minute, okay? Like I said, in 2009, I was introduced to a physician in South Florida through my MMA coaches and contacts. I did my first blood work, like I said. The Navy wouldn't help. So I went to a civilian doctor, actually, and they prescribed me Androgel, the pump gel. And it was like, hey, put one on your shoulder each day. We'll do another blood test. It didn't affect me at all. Went up to 4 pumps. Didn't affect me at all, really. It was like we were teetering around 150, 200 after the injection, or after the rubbing the gel on. So that didn't work at all either, okay? I had been doing deployments here at this time. So went 2 to Ramadi. After my 3rd one here, I was just at the end. I was like, I'm so fucking tired. It was bad. My body was falling apart, right? And then that's when I was able to find a physician that had experience working with bodybuilders and things like that, and powerlifters, and kind of like giving more advice. And that's the first time I got any sort of injectable testosterone. But again, it was really kind of outside the Navy's purview, and because they wouldn't help. So it was a real big mystery because they didn't even try to bother discovering what was going on, right? And this is all before my use. And that's also the same time where I was such a low point, I started abusing pain medication. And that's really things went kind of bad. I was using anabolics to kind of keep up with my down regulation. I was taking pain meds to deal with it. It was just a nightmare, right? So about, from 2009, and when I left service at 2013, I had done 26 blood draws out in the civilian world to help regulate my hormones and understand it. And because like I said, the Navy wouldn't do any of my blood work. And then in 2013, when I got out, when I was I was a pretty low point in my life, one of them. And through my contacts again, I was introduced to a powerlifter, a pretty prolific powerlifter, well known, that introduced me to one of his physicians. And that's where I first started getting to like a little bit more information, but it was still kind of underground. I was able to procure a little bit better anabolics than I was able to like scrounge around and like ask around and guess. Like, it was just a nightmare, okay? So I was out of the Navy in 2013. I continued that abuse to, like I said, 2016, and that's when my pain medication, everything, my whole life came to a head. I self-imploded, lost all my friends, all that sort of stuff appropriately, because I was just an absolute mess, a nightmare of a person, and just not put together in any sort of way, right? 2016, I lost 30 pounds in 21 days. I just, after every meal, I just throw up. And I just kept dropping weight and dropping weight and dropping weight. And I thought, like, man, I could feel like I have an autoimmune issue. And so, again, somebody looking out for me, God, good Lord looking out for me. I reached out to a friend of mine who is a former bodybuilder, like a high-end bodybuilder I had made friends with through those years of exit service. And he is the first time I got introduced to a physician that, like I said, at the end of a lot of bodybuilders' world, right, some of those guys need to re-regulate, understandably, because that sport demands that you're going to use a certain amount of androgynous things. You need to do it to compete. You can't compete in bodybuilding unless you're willing to do the thing, okay? And so a physician finally, after take a look at all my blood draws at 26 and all these things, and like, whoa, okay, stop. He's like, okay, we can get you back to normal. Well, my liver was literally failing. My pancreas still doesn't work super well. My kidneys were failing, like blood pressure through the roof. Like I was just a fucking ticking time bomb. If you look at my older videos from 2016, I'm fucking bright red, hair's all greasy, sweating all the time. Right? My body was going into basically shock, going to failure because of my anabolic use. My kidneys were shutting down, everything. All of that, all those hormones and the byproduct and the bad stuff was backing up into my skin. It was oily, it was smelly. Like I'm saying, it's super, super obvious when someone is using anabolic steroids and they say, no, I'm not. Yeah, you are. It's so fucking obvious, okay? Like I said, I was introduced to that physician, and that's when I met that physician. He's like, stop. It's not, the answer isn't just more of this, more steroids and more SARMs and more. It's like, hey, let's understand, like, let's try to reach in, basically, and see if we can normalize you and regulate you with peptides, help, right? So we stopped all my anabolic use, stopped all my SARM use, and we started using very specific peptides to target those, I guess, those interfaces with my biology, and drawing back from the anabolic use, drawing back from that, and using very specific peptides at a very, very manageable, usable, prescribed dose by physicians. I was able to start getting a hold of my physiology again. Like the vomiting stopped, the weight loss stopped, my sleep started to improve, and I was like, oh my God, like, and I was still really, really strong. I felt better than I ever had felt. And I was like, whoa, wait a minute, like there's a way through this thing to be healthy, be ethical, and not kill myself while I'm trying to do the things, right? And so that was like a real hard thing for me to kind of get around is, and here's the big problem, I guess, right? Maybe in hindsight, the big problem is because my testicles do not make testosterone, and they never ever will again, right? Now it's like, okay, now the prescribed anabolic use of the testosterone use is very finite. It's measured very intricately down to the milligram, right? As to where I inject it, how I inject it, all that stuff is very specific to the direction from our physicians. And Marek and those places, like, this is how you should do it, and this is how you really optimize your blood health. And I was like, it's such a frustrating thing, because if I feel as good as I do now at 46, if I hadn't just abused it at 28, 29, 30, right? If I only knew then what I know now, right? And that's also why I'm such a huge proponent of getting an understanding. This stuff isn't a mystery anymore. If you can get past your ego and get past the fear of it, there's plenty of people to ask that will help you dive in and answer very specific questions. It's not illegal. That's the first thing you guys understand, is going to a physician and getting direction from a physician to use these things because you need them. There is no illegal acts in that. There's no unethical acts, at least in my mind, rather, because if people are smoking and drinking on a daily basis and eating sugar, like, that's still my justification. It's like, I'm not on the quest of destroying my body because I need to look and feel a way. Like, I just need to feel a way because I love feeling good, and I don't have to do it through drug abuse. And that's the big thing. So, in summary, the last 7 years, of my life, I have been under strict guidance by physicians, by Marek and places previous to that, where I take a look at my blood every 120 or every 140 days at the longest to see. Why? Because if I need or want to continue to optimize my health, I need somebody, I need somebody that has a real extensive background in pharmacology, in its use through experience, right? Not bro science, not on websites, none of that nonsense. I don't get any of my information on the web, on the dark web, or from my bros. Like, it's ridiculous, okay? So for the last 7 years of my life, I've had real good guidance. My health is as good as it's ever been. And it's just kind of unfortunate that some of my now necessary use is because my organs, unfortunately, do not work as well as they should, even at 46. And so what I'm saying is, you don't need this stuff until you need it. Oftentimes we use it, and then it creates a hormonal imbalance for life that then we say, hey, I need this now. And I really, really fundamentally believe, I do, that if I had had proper guidance with the proper individuals when I was younger, I am certain that I probably would have never, ever gotten hooked on pain medication. No one, that's my fault. That should be super clear. My pain medication addiction was my fault. No one else's. It wasn't the Navy's fault. It wasn't any physician's fault. It was my fear of talking to someone to try to understand why I felt so bad. And I physically felt so bad. When I took pain meds, for a while, it dampened that. It's the same reason I think that people drink alcohol. My vice at the time was drugs, and then a vice became sex, and the vice became these things, and it's like, am I an addict? No, I'm just a person that doesn't make good decisions when stress is up and it's not managed, and that's why I do this. I need people to help me manage what I'm doing, because I know that I don't have the knowledge for it, and I don't have the experience, the extensive experience that it takes to manage these things. So I'm never going to be someone that says everyone should take it. I'm not even, like our athletes too, we don't talk about this. Because why? It's not my expertise. If they want to have conversations about steroids, peptides, and SARMs or anything outside of that, we introduce them to folks like Marek. Simple. Because if you really are serious about it, you're not too shy or too embarrassed or too afraid to talk. It's the same thing I say to my son. If you want to have sex, wear a condom. If you're too embarrassed to wear one, you probably shouldn't be having sex, right? You're walking around in foreign countries with a firearm taking human life, but you're too embarrassed or too shy or too afraid to ask a physician because you're afraid of the lash out. Can't help you there, okay? So if you are interested in understanding and optimizing your health through your blood work, you got to get some blood work. And then you have to take that blood work and have someone that is competent, that has your best interest in mind, and has a real education experience in this field to help guide you through this. Because the job that you're going to do, if you make it to that level, is extremely stressful, it's extremely important, and it's extremely demanding. And with my experience in sport and the tactical space, I think there's definitely a conversation that needs to be had when you encounter that much stress knowingly. So be smart, okay? Don't take advice from the dudes at the gym. I don't care how big they are and how strong they look and how great they think they feel. Don't do that, okay? There's really obvious indicators if people are abusing it, and that's typically what you see. Real puffy skin, red skin, oily skin, right? Fluctuations of body weight, oily hair, receding hairlines. There's all sorts of things that's super, super obvious. So if they're big and strong and jacked and they say they're not using it, I've never met a human in my life that is that's that naturally big and strong. So I'm just a believer in telling the truth, and that's my truth. My truth has absolutely no bearing on anyone else's experience, but I think it's important that people understand that if you're going to do it at a high level from the standpoint of education, okay? Don't dabble in this stuff. Don't experiment with it, because I promise you, if you do it like I did, you will spend the rest of your life managing it.